Tatiana Schlossberg, JFK's 35-year-old granddaughter and daughter of Caroline Kennedy, has died.
But behind that composed smile and that world-famous name, Caroline Kennedy, has lived a life that would break most people beyond any repair. Father murdered, uncle gunned down, mother gone, brother lost at sea, and now the cruelest blow of all. A daughter buried at just 35. At 68, Caroline's heartbreak has no end in sight. Here is her story, the crushing weight of a name and the price she paid for it. Let us start where everything begins for Caroline Kennedy. A name that opened every door while simultaneously slamming grief after grief right in her face. Born December 27, 1957 in New York City, Caroline Bouvier. Kennedy arrived in this world as the first child of Senator John F. Kennedy and the impossibly stylish Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy. From her very first breath, she was never just a little girl. She was a symbol, a piece of living American mythology. When her father won the presidency in 1963-year-olds, Caroline moved into the White House. Honestly, for a hot minute, it was magic. She had a kindergarten set up on the third floor. She had a pet pony named Macaroni. She had the entire world watching her with wide, adoring eyes. The press went absolutely wild for her. This gap-toothed, curious little girl toddling through the halls of the most powerful house on earth. But here is the thing about the Kennedy name. It gives and it takes away hard. On November 22nd, 1963, everything changed. Caroline was 5 years old, just 5 days shy of her 6th birthday when her father was assassinated by a sniper bullet in Dallas, Texas. In a single horrific afternoon, the most powerful man in her world was gone. The image that followed haunts history to this very day. Little Caroline, hand in hand with her mother Jackie, watching her brother John Jr. raise his tiny fist in a salute to his father's flag-draped coffin. It remains one of the most devastating photographs ever taken. A child dressed in pale blue saying goodbye to her daddy in front of the entire world. She never really got to grieve in private. She never had that option. The Kennedys were America's royal family, and their pain was always public. Within 2 weeks, Jackie packed up the children and left the White House. But the heavy weight of that name followed them everywhere they went. And if you think losing her father at 5 was the worst Caroline Kennedy ever faced, oh, we are just getting started. She survived that unthinkable loss as a child. But what about the years that followed? Was there ever a period of true peace for Caroline? Or was tragedy already lurking around the next corner? Loss after loss, the Kennedy curse comes for Caroline. The phrase Kennedy curse gets thrown around a lot. Sometimes it sounds dramatic. Sometimes it sounds like tabloid fodder. But when you actually sit down and look at what Caroline Kennedy has lived through, you start to wonder if it is something else entirely. Something almost truly unbearable. Just 5 years after her father's assassination in June 1968, Caroline lost her beloved Uncle Bobby, Robert F. Kennedy, the man who had become something of a father figure to her, who had stepped in to help fill that devastating void, was shot dead the very night he won the California Democratic primary. Another assassin, another Kennedy, another open casket. Caroline was 10 years old. Then in 1968, her mother Jackie made a decision that shocked the world. She married Greek shipping tycoon Aristotle Onassis. For Caroline, it was complicated. Her mother needed security, needed to escape the relentless burning glare of American public life. But marrying a man so wildly different from her father, it was a rupture of sorts in the fairy tale people had built around the Kennedy family. Caroline handled it with the quiet dignity she had already learned was expected of her. For a stretch in the 70s, Caroline tried to just live. She studied at Radcliffe College, earned her law degree from Columbia University, and in 1986, she married Edwin Schlossberg, an interactive designer and author, in a ceremony that finally felt like something purely joyful. They would go on to have 3 children, Rose, Tatiana, and Jack. For a moment, it seemed like Caroline had carved out something beautiful on the other side of all that pain. But the curse was not done. In 1994, Jacqueline Kennedy, Onassis, the iconic, fiercely protective mother who had shielded her children as best she could, was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She was gone by May that same year at just 64 years old. Caroline had now lost both parents. And then, as if the cruel universe had not already taken enough, 1999 arrived. On July 16th, 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr., his wife Carolyn Bessette, Kennedy and her sister Lauren Bessette boarded a small plane. John was at the controls. They were heading to Martha's Vineyard for a cousin's wedding. The plane went down into the Atlantic Ocean. All three were killed. John was 38. Caroline, the last surviving member of John's immediate family. She lost her family, her only sibling, and her partner to grief. That was the one person who knew every loss she had ever felt. A Kennedy historian later put it with crushing simplicity. Just think about the weight of the losses Caroline has suffered. Only John had suffered the same. And then she lost John. At 41 years old, she had outlived her father, mother, and brother. She was the last one standing. But even amidst that wreckage of endless grief, Caroline Kennedy did not collapse. She rebuilt her life. She pursued a career, served her country, and became someone truly remarkable in her own right. What did she actually build? Was it enough to keep the darkness away? Look at the woman she eventually became. Caroline finally steps into the light. Here is something that gets lost in all the talk about tragedy. Caroline Kennedy is genuinely and impressively accomplished, and that matters. It shows a woman who absolutely refused to be defined by her pain. After earning her law degree from Columbia, she worked as a researcher at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Later, she pivoted toward writing and education reform. She co-authored several books about the Constitution and civil liberties. She served as an advisor at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. She also helped to create the Profile in Courage Award back in 1989. Named after her father's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, this annual honor recognizes extraordinary acts of political bravery. In short, she was doing the work to keep her father's legacy alive while quietly and determinedly building her own. In 2008, Caroline grabbed headlines when she publicly endorsed Barack Obama for president. She called him the leader most reminiscent of her own father. That endorsement carried enormous symbolic weight, and it actually worked. She later co-chaired Obama's vice presidential search committee and played a vital role in his re-election campaign back in 2012. Then in 2013, President Obama appointed Caroline Kennedy as the United States ambassador to Japan, making her the first woman ever to hold that prestigious position. She served with real distinction until 2017, attending solemn ceremonies for atomic bomb victims in Hiroshima, strengthening military alliances, and proving that the Kennedy name could still stand for something on the world stage. In 2022, President Biden tapped her again, this time as the United States ambassador to Australia. She served until late 2024, focusing on climate change, Pacific security, and Indo-Pacific alliances. She was a diplomat in every single sense of the word, precise, measured, and powerful. Yet life kept interrupting. In early 2025, while wrapping up her ambassadorial duties, Caroline found herself in a very public family war, one that tested her restraint and her own personal convictions in ways even the diplomatic world never could. She had faced assassinations, plane crashes, cancer, and grief upon grief. But nothing prepared the world for the massive Kennedy family feud that exploded into the open, and the pure venom Caroline unleashed at her own cousin. The Kennedy family feud, Caroline versus Robert F. Kennedy Jr. If you thought the Kennedy family was all unity and shared sorrow, think again. Because in early 2025, Caroline Kennedy went off in a way that genuinely stunned the world. Her cousin Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had spent years building a platform around anti-vaccine conspiracy theories and various fringe health claims. When President-elect Donald Trump nominated Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services in late 2024. Caroline Kennedy, who had spent a career being measured, restrained, and diplomatic, absolutely lost it. On January 28, 2025, just hours before her cousin's Senate confirmation hearing, Caroline published a truly devastating open letter. Her son, Jack, posted a video of her reading it to social media, and the internet went completely feral. She called Robert F. Kennedy Jr. a predator. She argued he was entirely unqualified to lead the nation's health agencies. She accused him of vaccinating his own children while publicly discouraging other parents from doing the same. She claimed he had encouraged siblings and cousins down the path of substance abuse when they were young. She said she found his behavior egregious, and then she went somewhere even deeper. Bobby continues to grandstand off my father's assassination and that of his own. Father, she wrote, it is incomprehensible to me that someone who is willing to exploit their own painful family tragedies for publicity would be put in charge of America's life and death situations. That line hit like a thunderclap. Here was Caroline Kennedy, who had never once traded on her grief, who had spent decades quietly carrying the weight of her father's murder, calling out a man who, in her view, was weaponizing that same tragedy for personal gain. She also said that both her father and her Uncle Bobby would be disgusted by what her cousin had become. It was extraordinary. The most private Kennedy, the one who had spent her entire life avoiding exactly this kind of messy public spectacle, had drawn a hard, bright line. And she had drawn it in the middle of an already personal fight, a devastating era. While drama played out globally, something far darker was unfolding within her own family. That political feud with her cousin was bitter and very public. But privately, Caroline was fighting an entirely different personal battle, one that no amount of public dignity or poise could ever prepare her for. The beginning of the end. Tatiana's diagnosis. This is the chapter of Caroline's life that hurts the most. The part that feels cruelly unfair, even for a woman who has spent her life surrounded by tragedy. Tatiana Kennedy. Schlossberg was Caroline's middle child, a brilliant environmental journalist and author covering climate, change and health. Friends and peers often described her as thoughtful, principled, and deeply determined. She truly mirrored the best traits of her mother. In May 2024, Tatiana welcomed her second child, a baby girl. She and husband George Moran were raising a son, and life seemed full of promise. Then everything changed. During labor, Tatiana was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, rare and aggressive blood cancer. Doctors discovered she carried inversion 3-1 of the disease's most difficult mutations to treat. She was just 34, and her newborn daughter was only days old. For over a year, Tatiana fought through brutal treatments. Throughout that ordeal, Caroline Kennedy and her husband Edwin Schlossberg reportedly spent countless days in hospital rooms while helping raise their grandchildren. They were supporting their daughter through the fight of her life while parenting her little ones simultaneously. November 2025. Tatiana shared her reality in a deeply personal essay for The New Yorker titled A Battle with My Blood. She revealed her diagnosis, her inner fears, and the painful truth of her prognosis. She reflected on how she had always tried to shield her mother from pain and expressed heartbreak that her illness became yet another tragedy for a family already marked by profound loss. She also wrote about the incredible support of her parents and siblings, explaining that they stayed by her side and cared for her children every single day during her illness. On December 30th, 2025, Tatiana Kennedy Schlossberg died at 35. She leaves behind a husband and 2 young children. For Caroline Kennedy, it was another unimaginable blow. After burying her father, uncle, mother, and brother, she now faced the grief of burying her own child. 5 months later, she finally speaks out. Her early life revisited, the little girl who learned to carry the world, to understand Caroline Kennedy at 68. You have to look back to the beginning, to the girl who learned early what it meant to be a Kennedy. She grew deep up in the White House, but loss entered her world long before the assassination that defined her youth. Her mother, Jackie Kennedy, endured miscarriages, and in August 1963, Caroline's baby brother, Patrick Bouvier. Kennedy was born prematurely and died just 2 days later. Caroline was only 5. She had already witnessed her parents' heartbreak before facing the sudden loss of her father. There was joy in those early years, too. She had a pony. Named Macaroni attended a small kindergarten inside the White House and shared a deep bond with her father. President John F. Kennedy was completely devoted to his daughter. The famous photographs of Caroline playing under the Resolute desk were never staged. They were just glimpses of everyday life in the Kennedy White House. Then came November 22nd, 1963. Losing a parent is devastating. Losing one in such a violent public way is something else entirely. Caroline's personal grief became permanently linked to the nation's grief. Every anniversary, documentary, museum exhibit, and election cycle brought renewed attention to a trauma she could never fully escape. She learned early how to stay composed. Measured words, controlled emotions, and dignified public. Appearances became her essential survival tools. For decades, she carried herself with grace, forged under immense pressure. In 1986, she married Edwin Schlossberg, a designer and intellectual living far outside the typical Kennedy spotlight. Together, they built a stable, quiet life. In a family famous for persistent drama, their nearly 4-decade marriage stood out for its consistency and strength. Friends and historians have often noted that Jackie Kennedy's approach to motherhood, protecting her children, and keeping life normal as possible became Caroline's own model. Now, after losing Tatiana, that lesson carries weight. Family friend told reporters that Caroline was leaning on the same example her mother set decades ago, helping her. Grandchildren remember their mother while navigating this fresh, unimaginable loss. She followed that playbook before, and somehow she is following it again, breaking her silence and what comes next. 5 months. That is how long. Caroline Kennedy stayed silent after burying her daughter. No statements, no interviews, and absolutely no social media. She kept her grief private and shattering. The exact type of pain she has always hidden away. The kind that her family has been forced to carry for 60 years. Then on Sunday, May 31st, 2026, she walked to a podium. At the John F. Kennedy Profile in Courage Awards in Boston, an event she helped build at her own father's library. And she spoke. She started with gratitude, thanking her family for keeping her father's spirit alive and well. She held her composure through the opening remarks. Then she finally reached the moment she came to share. Fighting back tears with a voice that stopped the entire room, cold Caroline Kennedy spoke about her child publicly. It was the first time since Tatiana passed away. She told the audience Tatiana had served on the library board. She embodied the values her parents stood for throughout a life that was beautiful, remarkable, and tragic. The room erupted. Caroline pulled herself together, thanked the crowd, and pushed through to finish. Those were her first public words about her daughter. Careful, loving, restrained, and just completely heartbreaking. The memorial service was held back in January at St. Ignatius Loyola Church in New York on the Upper East Side. The family attended, including her son, Jack Schlossberg. A new generation of Kennedys standing in the wreckage, right beside her. Caroline is 68 now. She has buried her father, her uncle, her mother, her brother, and now her daughter. She is raising her own grandchildren with the same quiet grit Jackie showed. She is showing up. She is enduring. Presidential historian Stephen M. Gillon, who has studied this family for his whole career, put it simply, for Caroline, it is a series of horrible personal tragedies that lead up to what may be the hardest of them all, truly the hardest of them all. For a woman who lost her father before turning 6, that sentence hits with the full, unbearable weight of a lifetime. Neil Diamond wrote the song Sweet Caroline, reportedly inspired by an old photo of her as a young girl riding a horse. That little girl in the picture had no idea what was ahead. No clue her life would become a masterclass in carrying impossible weight with such impossible grace. At 68, Caroline Kennedy is still carrying it, and heartbreakingly, she is still standing. If Caroline Kennedy's story proves anything, it is that some people are handed a burden so heavy that it would flatten most of us. Yet they carry it anyway, quietly, year after year. Such an extraordinary, devastating, and resilient woman. If this video moved, you hit like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe. You do not want to miss what is coming next. We are looking into another public figure whose private heartbreak will absolutely floor you.